Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
This is KRWG Public Media, TV, radio, online, news that matters. Now, across the Mesilla Valley and the Borderland, the stories that shape our community. From the KRWG Broadcast Center at New Mexico State University, this is Newsmakers.
Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Johnny Coker. In today's episode, we'll be talking to a board member from Borderplex Connect to learn about broadband access in rural areas of southern New Mexico and West Texas. But first, let's take a look at how local organizations are working to get their communities connected. I have more in this report. Rural communities in southern New Mexico often find themselves with few options for internet service. And for residents, this can create significant barriers to essential services and opportunities. Sandra Scanova lives in Mesquite with her husband and nephew. She says that no matter the service provider, getting reliable internet is virtually impossible.
Sometimes, like during the school year, where my nephew is doing homework or tutoring on his computer, and I'm still working, we can't do both. Or right now, like in the summer, when he has some time off, he'll try to play video games while I'm working, and we can't do that either.
Sandra's internet service provider advertises download speeds in Mesquite to be up to 10 megabits per second, but her speed is often much worse than that. And with her lifestyle of working from home and caring for her family, she says she would welcome infrastructure projects, but does not know where to start.
Okay, how do we go about it? Like, how do we do it? Like, how do we get those resources how do I bring those resources into my home, into my community? Not just like, okay, there's gonna be a meeting. Oh, okay, well, what else do I do, you know?
To help solve the issue of outreach, Borderplex Connect, a coalition of several entities, was awarded $300,000 through the federal government's Affordable Connectivity Program to help connect Borderland communities. Daisy Maldonado, director of the Empowerment Congress and board member of Borderplex Connect, said that outreach is just the beginning of solving the issue of connectivity.
We understand that both the state and the federal, even the county government, have often ignored these communities, but there's a solution here. Let's just keep trying, and not give up. And it might take a little while, but through our collective power, we can actually move and change things at the local level, at the state level, and even at the federal level.
Roughly 20% of New Mexicans don't have access to a reliable internet connection. And for people living in rural communities, that can be a hindrance to everyday life. To address this, the state appointed Kelly Schlegel as the first director of the Office of Broadband Access and Expansion. The office recently secured $675 million in federal funding meant to enhance connectivity in underserved areas.
This is what we need to do for our children. The economic development, the opportunities for schooling, the communities keeping their children engaged and wanting to stay there and not leave for another state. Those things can't be measured in dollars.
Schlegel's office has been tasked to lead the effort to connect communities that may not be commercially viable.
We can collaborate, we can point to the tools, we can coach, we can make sure the puzzle pieces are coming together, but we need you and your community to form a broadband team with a broadband action leader. I wish they could have a paid one in every community, but sometimes it takes a volunteer.
These efforts have already been underway in the border city of Sunland Park, where a group called Mamacitas Cibernéticas conducted a survey to gauge digital needs of the community. The group was awarded around $15,000 from the city's American Rescue Plan Act funds to conduct the report. Maria Chaparro, community representative for the group, said it's now up to the city to take action.
What I would like the city of Sunland Park to do is be the leader and galvanize and pressure the other resources here, like Empowerment Congress, like Gadsden Independent School District, to form a coalition, to pull resources together, to make a plan to get these monies that are coming down from these broadband initiatives and implement digital literacy services. And it's all outlined in how they can do that in this report.
According to their report, 92% of individuals surveyed considered lack of skills as the biggest barrier to their use of the internet, and only about 9% of those surveyed knew where to go to find technical support for personal devices when they need it. Chaparro said that she hopes the city can secure federal funds passed down to the New Mexico Office of Broadband Access and Expansion.
We did a lot of groundwork for them, so I want them to follow through. You saw how many community people were present. They're waiting. They are willing and able to participate in these services, but now they're waiting.
For Javier Perea, mayor of Sunland Park, the work that Mamacitas Cibernéticas did is a step in the right direction.
We have to start somewhere, and I think this provides an opportunity, a sampling of what exists across the entire county within this, this area. And if we work together, we can bridge these gaps that exist with the need for education, broadband access, and anything that comes with that. Any infrastructure dollars that we can tap into, we try and reach those dollars. But again, there's a component of matching dollars as well that have to be put up by municipalities or government entities. So these are dollars that we have to pursue in a measured basis.
Before the end of the year, the state will submit a plan to the federal government detailing how the funds will be deployed around the state. In the meantime, advocates in rural communities say they'll continue to broadcast their need for broadband speeds as they wait for action from local, state, and federal programs. Joining us now is Daisy Maldonado, board member for Borderplex Connect. Daisy, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Johnny. Thank you for having me.
What is the mission of Borderplex Connect? Can you sort of, for our listeners and viewers that may not know, can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, well, first, it's a recently formed nonprofit organization that is intended to serve both El Paso County and Doña Ana County to bring resources and knowledge around broadband services to the area. And so really our mission is not only to support the growth of broadband, but then also support the digital skills in the community.
I know rural communities, getting high-speed internet to rural communities is a big issue. And you guys just got $300,000 from the federal government, so tell me what those funds are going to be used for.
Yeah, so the $300,000 actually came from the FCC, and that's for the Affordable Connectivity Program, the ACP program. And essentially what that does is provide a discount for broadband services to low-income households. And so that's not necessarily dealing with infrastructure, but it's a way to mitigate the high cost of internet services for our low-income communities and families. However, it's not necessarily, like that funding already exists there, and so the grant is actually just to do lots of outreach and try and get as many people connected as we can, and that we're actually going to spread between El Paso County, Doña Ana County, and actually as well as Luna County.
Mm-hmm. And I know at the press conference that I reported on, y'all even talked about even expanding, internationally into Mexico, into Juarez a little bit. Is that something that's ongoing, or how are those efforts looking so far?
Yeah, so that piece is really around the connectivity pieces and what that could look like, but that's still in the real infancy stages. We haven't, panned out a real hardcore strategic plan on how to get there.
Okay, so for low-income communities that may need internet services, how can they get help with paying their internet bill and things like that? Can you sort of take us through that?
Yeah, so they essentially would fill out the application online, right? And so that process is if they already receive some sort of income or some sort of support services like SNAP benefits or income support, then they would probably qualify, and so then they could just apply for it and then get essentially like a voucher and get the reduced rate.
So I know the New Mexico office of broadband and expansion recently received somewhere around $675 million for this whole effort to expand broadband into rural communities that may not be commercially viable. Are you guys in contact with that office at all?
So we are developing a relationship with them, and so the announcement came, right, that $675 million will be coming to New Mexico. And the thing about it is we're not there yet in terms of how we're going to spend the money. So part of the the mandate for the Office of Broadband Access and Expansion is that they have to create a plan on what they're going to do, right, in the state of New Mexico. And it's true that services are really supposed to be focused around those that don't have internet at all or have really poor service. And so they've been going around the state figuring out like where is that need really does exist, because last year the FCC asked service providers to tell them where they provide service, and sometimes that hasn't really reflected what's the truth on the ground in terms of who can get service and who cannot. And so from there, after the plan, then it's sort of what communities can apply for that funding, and then what is exactly is that going to look like? So that's definitely in the realm of what we want to be doing in terms of looking at, but again, both El Paso County and Doña Ana County, what communities are most in need that have zero service and or have very poor service.
Mm-hmm. So I know in that same vein, the Office of Broadband of New Mexico, they're trying to feel out who needs these services the most, but it seems like there's a gap between people that can even speak out and say we need these services. They don't even know this sort of thing exists. So where do you guys come in with that?
Yeah, and so what we are also developing a plan is where the starting point is actually looking at the map, right? And so the FCC put out a map of the whole United States saying who has what, and then looking at the map where there's clearly no service. Okay, so there we don't have to like sort of go out and talk to folks to say, are you sure you don't have service? Mm-hmm. Right, so it's looking at places that say, that are reported to have some sort of service, but in fact, again, have either no service or very poor service. And we're working with different folks around the community and the different colonias who know, right, who also are in those positions that are like, yeah, I have maybe satellite, but it's really not good at all, right? And this is what it delivers to me. So then that's where we're working to figure out the map. And actually that's between, and specifically here in Doña Ana County, we'll also be working with the city of Las Cruces with both of their offices as well and their designated folks to figure that out.
Mm-hmm. And so again, talking about the Office of Broadband, it seems like it's going to take a while for this thing to sort of trickle down. They're going to submit, supposedly by the end of the year, their plan to the federal government of how these funds are going to be used. And from there, it's going to have to be approved, and it's a whole bureaucratic process. So, and in my reporting, I've run into folks who say, they don't really have faith in these institutions to get them what they need. So what would your response to that be? What would your appeal to them be?
Yeah, well, I would say in terms of actually Borderplex Connect is in a really good position to sort of help lead the way in creating like a community coalition. So when we can work together with community as well as, within that bureaucratic system, knowing that, okay, this application is going to take this long, this is actually the services that we need, who can apply for it, and then work with the community at the same time to actually build that, build the trust and then build that infrastructure, right? And I think that, but I also think that I hear the community members, right? It is going to be a very long process, and it's, there's going to be lots of red tape, and there's lots of uncertainty because broadband is something super brand new. Like we know how to, we've had utilities for years and years. There's been the telephone service for years and years, but broadband, and in particular laying fiber, right, is, although it's not very new, but in the rural communities and the colonia communities in particular, that infrastructure just hasn't existed. Mm-hmm.
Again, in my reporting, I ran into Mamacito Cibernéticas, yes, who is a community group that is advocating for, broadband expansion and education. What is Borderplex Connect relationship with them?
Yeah, so we actually are serving as their fiscal sponsor when they receive some funding from the city of Sunland Park to do their study. So what we really want to do is, again, work in concert with them in terms of building a curriculum and a plan to reach out to the communities that are most in need, that need that understanding around how to even use the internet. And that's probably the biggest finding out of their study, was that people wanted it, but they really just don't know. Some of them just really don't know how to use it.
And that's something that the Office of Broadband is doing as well, I think, is that they're implementing digital literacy courses throughout rural areas, so maybe they can sort of be helped with that sort of thing. How is Borderplex Connect involved with any sort of education or broadband education or things like that?
So in El Paso County, they were in the past, and so they worked with Microsoft to provide some trainings around digital literacy through utilizing community health workers to go out into the smaller communities within in El Paso County. And so what we're really trying to do then is see how we might be able to replicate that in Doña Ana County.
Okay. So does Borderplex Connect have any other relationships with community groups that may be similar to Mamacitas Cibernetica's in any other areas, or is that sort of the main?
Yeah, that's really the main group that we have a relationship with right now.
Okay. So what is the next step in terms of Mamacitas Cibernetica's and Borderplex Connect? How can they move forward? They did the surveying and they did, the study of the needs in their area. So what's next?
Yeah, I mean, really what's next is to developing a real concrete plan on how we're going to reach into the colonia communities and those who are most in need, and then really reach out to get some funding to make that happen. And how is that going to happen? I mean, through the city of Sunland Park, they're going to have to get some money from the federal government, right? Or how is that going to work? Yeah, so Borderplex Connect actually, in terms of our strategy around financial viability of a program like that, actually we're going to look to private philanthropy. Private philanthropy,
can you go more into that?
So I'm not a philanthropist or philanthropist in New Mexico, but the idea is we're reaching out to folks in both actually Texas and New Mexico to see about getting some sort of pilot money to start a program here in the state.
And that would that be geared toward actual infrastructure or education?
That would be geared more toward education.
Okay. And so it seems like infrastructure is a hugely expensive thing. I mean, again, the state got over $500 million from the federal government. Do you think that's enough money?
Absolutely not. Not for the whole state, and not for what we need. Everything is just going to be way more expensive than I think we're going to, we imagine it would be. And because there's because of the FCC map saying that there's all this service that's actually being provided in New Mexico that doesn't really exist, that's where I see where maybe the shortfall came in. But in order to really provide good quality, high-speed internet, we're going to need good quality, infrastructure.
So I know the FCC, as of right now, defines broadband internet as 25 megabits down and 3 megabits up, but they're looking at even expanding that number more. Do you think that's the right thing to do? Do you think 25 megabits down is even enough to run a modern day household the way that we live our lives these days?
I think it depends on the household, but I would probably not, right? I don't think that with everything that we use broadband for, just from watching movies to playing video games to, going on the internet just looking for stuff, watching cooking shows. For a whole household, I don't think that that's the case.
So, and it seems like, especially going back to Mamacitas Cibernetica's, it seems like especially with the elderly population, it could be very important for telehealth visits, things like that. So how could an expansion actually help New Mexico both on a monetary scale and a social scale?
Yeah, so, certainly on a monetary scale, right? Because again, also thinking about the smaller communities that are more isolated and hard to reach. So if they have internet there, they can even do some like online shopping, maybe somebody that is living with a disability that can't travel can actually, do some, internet shopping that they otherwise wouldn't have access to. Or somebody could have an at-home business, right? That they can't run at this point because they don't have that service. And then, for people who are living with disabilities or those who are elders who again, it's very difficult to leave their home, then this would allow for connection to service providers, to healthcare providers, so that they don't have to take that risk to leave their home, but then they could still get the same service, from the safety of their home.
Mm-hmm. So what do you see as some potential roadblocks or speed bumps in the process of getting this infrastructure set and getting people educated on what's incoming from the federal government and from the state broadband office?
Yeah, so I think probably the speed bumps or the barriers are really going to be around, the state's going to have a plan, right, that they have created after listening to folks, and the money's going to be there. But then who is going to be responsible for carrying that out? So maybe they'll send the money to Doña Ana County saying, based on the services that are there, this is what we think that you can use to build infrastructure. And then it's going to be, I don't know if it's going to be Doña Ana County's job or responsibility then to then put an RFP out to get service providers like Spectrum or CenturyLink or Comcast to say, hey, we need this infrastructure built. Will you apply for some funding? Because they're not going to take on that responsibility. And so the gap, I think, is it going to be financially advantageous for those companies to take on those projects, even though the funding will be there, but is it actually going to turn into a long-term paying customer? And that's where I feel like that's probably where the biggest gap is going to be, where there's that opportunity and yet they might not still see it as something viable for their bottom line.
Right, so commercial viability is sort of probably something that's still in the back of these companies' minds. And I know in the general public, these big tech giants and broadband infrastructure companies might not have the most public trust. So how do you feel that we can ensure that these companies are held accountable and get those services to the people that truly need it, not necessarily the ones that are just commercially viable?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know. How do you compel a company to not think about its own bottom line? I think that the RFPs and the funding opportunities really have to be compelling enough and provide enough incentive for them to then also to come in and provide that infrastructure, as well as the possibility of extending the affordable connectivity program. So if they know, well, these customers, once they get connected, they'll be part of this program, and then that program will exist, for the next 10 or 20 years, something like that. Then they could maybe see the financial, financial viability. But if not, then I can definitely see them not wanting to apply, or apply for funding for projects that would build sort of like the main infrastructure, like the backbone, but not what they call the last mile from that main infrastructure to someone's home, right? And then the homeowner would be required to do that.
Do you think, and that obviously is going to take a long time, do you think that maybe there should be some sort of watchdog that should be funded maybe by the state of New Mexico or federal government, just to ensure that these companies are doing the things they're saying they're doing?
Yeah, well, I would really hope that the Office of Broadband, Access and Expansion would take on that role, because not only are they, trying to connect New Mexico, but then sure, they hold the companies up, accountable for it. But we know that might not also be possible. So I definitely think like a coalition again that Borderplex Connect could create could actually step into that role to ensure that contracts are being fulfilled, that companies are treating their customers right, following the laws, things like that. Yeah.
Have you guys talked to any of those stakeholders, any of the big internet companies, or even the small contractors that contract out that type of work? Is that something that Borderplex Connect has on their agenda, or that they've done so far?
Yeah, so we haven't done that so far, and it's certainly part of our agenda, and we are in the process of hiring a contractor who will be supporting us in terms of like filling out those applications, but then also who has the expertise around broadband, sort of the technical expertise, but then also working with the companies as well, like what exactly
are they going to be responsible for it? What are the expectations? And then, be in that sort of negotiating realm so that we know also that we can be up to date on what's going on with those projects.
Daisy Maldonado is the director of the Empowerment Congress of Doña Ana County and a board member for Borderplex Connect. Daisy, thanks so much for being with us here today.
Thank you, Johnny.
That's our time for now. Join us this week on KRWG Radio. Every weekday, it's morning edition 5 to 9, fresh air at 11, followed by Here and Now Noon to 2, and All Things Considered 4 to 7. KRWG News is always online at krwg.org, and we'd like to hear from you. Email us with a story idea and video submissions. The address is feedback@nmsu.edu. For all of us at KRWG News, I'm Johnny Coker. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time on Newsmakers.